Hey, before we get started here, I just want to let you know that as a little thanks for listening, my company's offering listeners to this podcast some free software. So if you want to learn more about that, we have some more details at the end after the interview. Alternatively, track me down on LinkedIn and I'll have a pinned post at the top of my profile. Just search for Joe Meadows and we'll take it from there. All right, let's get started. Hi there, this is Joe Meadows and welcome to Safety Leaders Now, the show where we cut through the noise and identify the strategies and tactics that today's top safety leaders use to keep their teams safe. On today's episode, we've got Fran Diehl, who is the lead safety at Pods, the modular moving company. We've just finished the conversation. We had a few technical difficulties, so hopefully those all get ironed out in the editing process before you listen to this. But I guess, Val, as the fly on the wall during the conversation, anything particular you gained from the conversation that folks can look forward to?
First of all, I really enjoyed her passion. She's so passionate about not only like safety, road safety, but also pods, which I think is really cool when someone's super into like the company that they're working for. And throughout the conversation, y'all spoke a bunch about hiring, which I think a lot of the audience will be able to take away from. She has this amazing energy, so I think a lot of people are going to enjoy just even listening to her. She's clearly super knowledgeable and yeah.
Yeah, so Fran has super varied career, which we'll get into a little bit, but we covered, well, originally we thought we were going to talk a ton about hiring, which we did get to at the end, but we made a little bit of a tangent on kind of automotive road safety, the things she's doing there, because that component of the hazard footprint at Pods is pretty dynamic and I think is pretty challenging, and she's had a huge impact there. She set up their safety function from the ground up, so we touch on that, and then we get into hiring at the end. So with that, we'll dive into the episode. Hope you enjoy it. That's it. All right, let's go. Hi, Fran. Nice to chat with you this morning.
Good morning, Joe. Nice to talk with you as well.
Okay, so before we dive in, I'm excited about this conversation. To do a little bit of foreshadowing, Fran and I are going to be talking about hiring today. We're going to be talking about how to hire awesome safety teams and also how to move up if you're a safety professional looking to rise in the ranks a little bit. But before we get into that, I want to pass the baton to yourself, Fran, and just learn a little bit more about you. What do you do? Where do you work? And what does your company do? Can you give us a little background?
Absolutely. So I'm the Enterprise Safety Director for Pods Enterprises. Pods is the same Pods that's in the moving and storage space. We're owned by the Canadian Teachers Pension, which is really a noble cause. And I'm a part of the first inaugural safety team. And so I have a team, it's 14 of us. And we actually are doing all of the groundwork to build their safety program, to build a safety program and culture here at Pods.
Gotcha. And how big is the company itself outside of the safety team? How many employees are you looking at?
We have a little less than 3,000 employees, so it's not a huge footprint. I think our challenge is we're very geographically dispersed. So we operate in the continental United States, obviously, and we operate in Canada. And so when you're looking at just the footprint of our team and the span of control, we have a lot of geography to cover with our team, our current team structure.
You briefly alluded to it here, but maybe just because it'll color the rest of the conversation, can you just give me a little bit more background on what are the daily operations of Pods as a company look like? And then what does that hazard footprint look like, as far as the things that you're trying to manage on a day-to-day? Because I'm sure the kind of consumer experience is different than behind the curtain.
So first I'll, preface by saying that Pods is a motor carrier. Our real intention of business is to move people's goods from one place to the next, whether it's a new home in the same city or whether it's a new home across the whole other part of the country. We're really helping people to move their lives forward. That's not our logo, but it could be a really good logo. We move people's lives forward wherever that is, whether it is, we talk about in our company that moving is emotional, whether it's a new job, new home, but it could also be a dissolution of things, so to speak. And so we are there to assist our customers wherever they want to move their life. And so what we do is we drop off and we pick up containers. We proprietize the Podzilla That is ours. We have a patent on it, and it is a piece of equipment that allows us to make containers for moving and storage mobile. So what we really in essence have done is we've taken a lot of the sweat labor out of moving. Because historically you would get a truck, you would rent a truck, you would load the truck, you would take it to storage, you would unload it. What we did is we simplified that. We bring the container to you, you load it once, and then you don't have to load it into a unit. We store it completely locked and cared for you. And then when you're ready to actually move into your new place, then we drop the container back off and you unload it, within whatever time span that you desire. If you want it for 2 days, for 3 days, a week, whatever that time frame is, we work with you so that we customize moving and storage to the customer's needs.
Makes a ton of sense. I think if safety doesn't work out, you could be on the sales team. That's a pretty good sales pitch. So I assume there's probably a little bit of an environmental benefit as well. You don't have a bunch of small little U-Haul engines driving around. You can just drop the container off and you guys are going to be able to handle that with kind of economies of scale.
Yeah, and there is a risk footprint to that because obviously you are picking up containers and dropping them off unknown terrain. It's not like we have a plug and play model. You could live on a hill. I could live in the valley. And so the driver is going to have to be knowledgeable about not just placement of the container, but safe placement of the container based on how your home and your drop-off location is configured. So there is a lot of hazards that our drivers have to address on the fly. Now, obviously, we're training our drivers and we can't train you for every single situation. So we have to make you really comfortable with using the equipment because the equipment has to be used on different terrains. And so that is really where the hazard footprint is. And then obviously, because driving is the most dangerous thing that each of us do every day, because we're 4 times more likely to die in a car, which was part of my dissertation, that brings its own set of hazards to the job because you have a lot of uncontrollables on the road. Just getting the containers there. And then our vehicles are CDL vehicles. And so they're considered higher profile vehicles. And now you add the weight of the container, which is tonnage. And so you have the obviously makings of a perfect storm. So that's really what my team and I do every day. We try to prevent harm, to our associates, but also to the public. And so that's what we're striving to do, to build safety margins around the controllables, things that we can control.
Normally, I want to go a little bit into your background before pods, and I still want to do that, but we're here now. So what I'd be curious to know is driving is probably your sort of biggest hazard exposure. Do you also have a certain degree of kind of warehousing concerns or I guess with the storage of those pods? Is that another piece of the puzzle that you guys are trying to figure out?
So we do have our storage container centers. You're really good. We have our storage container centers where we actually store the customer's pod containers. And yes, you have a hazard footprint there, but that's a little more controlled because if I have you in an environment, I can kind of, control some of the hazards there. We have heavy equipment. Again, we're lifting 10,000 plus pound containers in most cases. And so that brings its own set of heavy equipment challenges. Just the types of equipment, I would say we're operating forklifts, but we're operating heavy duty forklifts to lift and to place containers. So you have that, but the real hazards, if I'm looking at our loss footprint, are on the road because you're moving containers all the time to wherever the customer needs those. And so although we do have the warehouse and that is a part of our safety build out, a lot of our resources are placed on just driver and driver safety and just getting the container safely and being able to operate, on the roads throughout the United States.
Do you know how long the pods has been around? How old is the company?
So our company is less than 30 years old. Unbelievably, we came around in 1998. Yeah. And so that's another challenge because when we came on the scene, we were new. And then our business model has since shifted. We originally started off as the individual franchisees. And then about 10 years ago, Pods Corporate made a pitch to buy everything back from the franchisees. And so that's a part of the strategy right now is just for us to all operate under one umbrella. obviously that's going to increase safety. It's going to make all the tangibles better because now it's controlled versus well, you do see some franchisee models like McDonald's operate, but they have a strict franchisee agreement. I don't know how any of that work with Pod, so I don't even want to endeavor into trying to figure that out. I just know that if you look at Pod's corporate and you look at a franchisee model, depending on where you are in the country, because there still are some franchisees, it may look slightly different. Even stuff like trucks. Even though we're using similar containers, because that is the proprietary part of it, it could be the trucks. It could be, the level of expertise of the driver. It could just be a lot of variances because they're at the luxury to do it the way that they want to do it because they own the franchise.
You mentioned earlier that you are setting up this sort of inaugural team. So again, it's not a 100-year-old company, but it's still been around for close on 30 years. So how long ago did you start standing up this safety team? How many months or years have you been working on this?
I just met my 1-year anniversary here, and we hired our first safety person in November of 2021. So it's really a young, immature team. And so when you're going into the market, you kind of have to, I was actually fortunate that I had about a 5-month head start so that I could really assess the business to say what type of safety professional would the company benefit from and get the quickest return from, and then who would be successful here. A lot of times I've been on both sides of it, right? Where I've been hired and now I'm hiring. So for probably the last 15 years of my career, I've been in a space where I've been able to hire talent. And so I always take the things that I desired, and I would think that a professional desire. Now, you're never going to know that until you ask, but you always put yourself in that situation. What would make me want to come to this company? And then what would make me want to stay with this company? And so not just on the ROI side of giving the company some return and guaranteeing some level of return, because I think we're at an hour in safety where we can't just be, COVID kind of shifted, the quality, and it put a lot of spotlight on the quality of safety professionals. So hiring in this COVID environment, it forces employers to be savvy, to be smarter about the type of talent that they're bringing in. But it also gave the candidates a lot of power too. And so I always say you're hiring your next leader and I'm hiring our best talent and best opportunity. And so that is really one of the mantras that I utilize. And then I'm always clear that I'm looking for partners, not for subordinates. I think at this hour, you want people with expertise. You want people who come in, you're hiring to your strength, things that you could be a little weak in, because we can't know everything. Even though I'm a PhD in safety, I do not know everything. And I preface that. And I love to say I make mistakes too. But I'm hiring people who are going to complement my weaknesses, and I'm going to be able to glean and learn from them. And then they're hopefully going to be able to glean and learn some things from me.
I think it's really interesting that, again, your tenure here is so new, and that, again, it's late 2021, feels like about 2 weeks ago for me, but it's whatever. It's been 6 months. Before we get into the building of that team, which I think is really, really interesting, and I think on so many people's minds right now, I'd love to just take a second and understand, was there any particular catalyst that Pod's corporate hired you a year ago before or after 23 years of not having an internal safety team? Was there anything that initiated that? Or again, we don't have to talk about this if there was something that we don't want to touch on.
Well, Pod's got a new CEO. They got a new CEO. And when you got a new CEO, then the top line issues shift. Our CEO is very tenured. She's been in the business a while, all types of businesses, and she knew what the business needed. And so that was her. I'm sure the board was a part of it as well. I'm sure there probably was some backside claims. Really, I always tell people in the safety industry, OSHA is not the reason that companies hire safety folks. I think people have gotten accustomed to being able to navigate the regulatory space. Insurance companies are the reason that people hire safety folks, because money is money. And at the end of the day, save money is made money. Safety may not be a P on the P&L. We're not a profit driver, but every day at 1 or 2 o'clock, when you get money that you're not spending, safety allows you to make money on money that you actually have. And so safety is a value that ends up in the long term paying for itself because of all the loss mitigation costs. Money drives all of this. So we do have a new CEO with a lot of strategy. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that the department got stood up because there was new leadership, because I thought either there's new leadership or something really bad happened. And I am glad that it's a new leadership catalyst. So the new leadership comes in, they stand up the department. Now, you just hit on something that immediately came to my mind when you were getting into the details of how the business operates. So as you said, you've got drivers going in and dropping containers off in totally uncontrolled private locations. And I think any safety professional listening could just understand the multitude of issues that you'd have to manage associated with that. But then it also occurred to me that you're leaving company equipment in those locations. As you said, insurance is where all this stuff comes in. So I start spinning in my head. Do you have any liabilities associated with that? And then additionally, my question is you've got those concerns. Again, managing drivers in uncontrolled situations. You've got concerns with leaving company equipment in private locations. And then you're also storing the invaluable items of your customers. So that seems like a very complicated, sort of nebulous footprint of hazards to manage. You mentioned that the driver, focusing on driving activities has really been your focus. Can you just help us understand? I have no doubt thought a lot about this as you've come in and tried to wrap your head around this business. Why did you end up on that sort of driver focused safety approach as you've been triaging the biggest impact that you can have?
It's funny because I always say that road hazards kind of chose me. I don't think I got into the business of safety saying that I wanted to do road safety, right? I don't think anybody wakes up. People look at, I guess, the glorious part of safety. Oh, we're preventing injuries inside of, work in a controlled environment. But I ended up starting in water utility. That was my first endeavor into safety. And a big portion of water utility dealt with the transport. We had water, wastewater, solid waste, which was trash. My first job was here in the Orlando area, and I worked for Orange County Utilities. And a big portion of our safety dealt with road safety. So I don't think Murray State prepared us for road safety. We talked about industrial hygiene, noise, people being injured, hurting their backs, slip, trips, and falls, and just, the regular, musculoskeletal. I think we left school having a well-rounded idea about injuries, but we didn't talk a lot about road safety. And then somewhere along my career journey, transportation fatalities became the number one cause of death at work. But every single company that I have ever worked for, we had CDL drivers or professional drivers who were in the business of transporting whatever. And so I had to become really good at that. And I ended up writing my dissertation on it because as you start to look at the number one causes of death for any group of people, even outside of work, transportation fatalities, when I said you're 4 times more likely to die in a car, that's all of us. And so that has been the biggest shift in my career, that I've dedicated a lot of time to just focusing on transportation. If you can fix transportation within an organization, you're going to fix a lot of the injuries. And that includes power industrial trucks, which are forklifts. They're trucks. That includes, some of the injuries that take place on site in vehicles that companies sometimes don't have to report to OSHA because unless the person is extremely injured. But if you injure someone else, the public, OSHA never knows about that. And so it forces us as safety professionals to kind of pivot. It's not just about protecting workers now, it's about protecting everybody. And so that is kind of where we started here at Pods. If we could fix the road portion of it, which is transparent. If you want to know a company's performance on the road, you just go to CSA, you go to FMCSA websites, DOT websites, you have your basic, your safer, you can look at all of that. That's open to the public domain. So I knew exactly what I was coming into. And I just made a declaration to the universe, which is so funny, place me where I could be of the greatest good. Now, I didn't know that we would would be here and it would be like a roller coaster because progress is never linear, but we have made substantial improvements. And that again is verifiable on the World Wide Web. Don't go by what friends say. Look at the pod safety profile to see just where our basic is going. It takes time to fix someone's basic scores, but we are definitely headed in the right direction.
Well, I just love that call for transparency. I think that's putting your money where your mouth is. So I'm curious to know, clearly, again, if anybody wants to look you up on LinkedIn, I think there's, your tenure here around transportation safety concerns. And again, I think with everything you explained with pods, it gave me a whole new appreciation for all those hazards that you'd be managing. So you came in with this really clear mandate to make a difference, and you saw this opportunity to make a difference in that area. So I'm curious here, I'm putting you on the spot, so be warned, but I'm curious to know, do you have any kind of your top 5 or, what's your hit list? And you could use pods as an example. When you came in the door, what are those things you wanted to implement to have the biggest impact on that transportation safety? Because as you said, it's something that almost all businesses are going to be dealing with.
So obviously, you want to know your driver footprint. I think that the federal regulations, which are very prescriptive for DOT carriers about what you need to know about your drivers as far as driver qualification, are there. But these rules were written, a very long time ago. And so there has been an increase in technology for us to be able to not just ascertain what the regs say we need to know, but to really get into the driver footprint. The feds also have increased their technological tools. When I started, you just had a DQ file. Now you have the PSP, you have other things. But the real catcher is, because they're creating a huge information highway to include the clearinghouse and other things about drug and alcohol, not just their MVR, their PSP, their accidents, things of that nature, but to be able to rank and score.
Is there any technology in particular that you use or that you like to use for these things? I mean,
there are a lot of reverse DMV pull systems is what I will tell you. DMV pull has been around, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years. California was instrumental in, utilizing the reverse pull because they wanted to know, especially for their commercial motor vehicle operators, just their violations, their medical fitness, etc. So DMV pull software is not new. Also, people, if you're in the carrier space, you're going to want to use telematics. I think that the way that we use telematics is actually changing. I used telematics way back in the day. I'm dating myself when it was pretty new. Now the focus should be expanded because you can use it as onboard supervision, meaning I don't need 1,000 road or street supervisors. I can just use telematics to monitor the behaviors of the drivers. So you're talking about reverse DMV pulls. Number 2 is telematics. And number 3 is using all of that data to be predictive. You should know what's in all of your driver's jacket. You should have some scoring methodology, whether you're piggybacking off of a DMV pull, but you should be able to use that to predict, to say, okay, I've risk ranked all my drivers. Asking people how have they risk ranked to me is the number 1 step. And what are you using in that risk rank? Are you using this number of, CSA stops, clean stops that are factored in the positive way towards the driver versus negative stops where the driver actually has violations and that is occurring in real time? And are you risk ranking the types of infractions on the state DMVs? Yes, the feds have disqualifiers, but do you look at, leading or in that case, bad indicators? And then what are you doing? I think a lot of times people make mistakes because they want to throw training at everybody. You're dealing in most cases with professional drivers who have a CDL. They've gone to school. Now with the new regs and changes, it's mandated that a CDL driver start at school. Back in the day, people were grandfathered. But, you have other key pieces of data that you can utilize to look at what a CDL driver is telling you in their day-to-day driving activity. And so something you'll see on our basic that we really drove down is the unsafe driving. And truthfully, that's because we started to risk rank and remove people from safety sensitive work. Because a driver is telling you by past and current decisions, which telematic addresses the current, DMV addresses the past along with the PSP. They're telling you what they're doing. And sometimes past behavior does predict future behavior. You can have interventions, but also a big thing I think that for me, I can't speak for the we, that I do is I recognize things that I can train drivers on and things I can't, or recommend drivers be trained on. I cannot train you to wear a seatbelt. That is a choice. It's the law, but that is a choice. There is no training. You click it, okay, you're going to click it or you're not. Why would I invest a company's resource in training you on seatbelts? I can tell you the advantages, but we know as adults, when people don't like something, they're going to reject it. It doesn't matter how many facts you put before them. So if I'm seeing a ticket that says you consistently have had within a reasonable time frame seatbelt, that's telling me what I need to know about you, that you're probably not wearing a seatbelt. And so these are things that you have all this data, right? Because we're in the hour of data. People love to talk about data. What the hell are you doing with the data? And how are you using it? And how, as the organization, you're asking them to pay for all these data points to include telematics, but are you using it to improve the safety of the business? And a lot of it, I don't think you need top 5 things. I just think you need data points. You need to be able to clearly risk rank your data points. And then you need to be able to decide what are the thresholds for intervention. And that's really what we did. There's no real playbook to that. I think any good safety person would come in and say, okay, I have the loss runs, the collisions that this person has had. I have their MVR. I have their CSA footprint. I have their previous employers. I have the clearinghouse. I have all these things with drivers that are telling me a story about Fran. Now, what am I going to do to either foster our culture or to say Fran is not suited to do the kind of driving that I need her to drive?
In your specific example, you are coming in, and again, you've got your safety team of 14 folks now, but that's all. I think they're all relatively new to the organization. How? And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I do want to pivot into the hiring conversation. But is there anything you can recommend to folks, whether it be resources that they can look into to kind of think about this synthesis of data, even if they have all these data points? What should they be doing with them so that they can understand them? Are you using technology for that? Are you using Excel sheets? And what does it look like?
Actually, our reverse DMV pull system, it has a dashboard and a platform where I can grab data. I can input data, their accident history, upload documents, score those documents. So if you have a DMV reverse pull system, a driver monitoring system, real-time monitoring, most of those companies have a platform. I've used 3 different companies, so I'm not recommending anything right now. I do love the one that I'm using now. I've used it at the past 2 employers.
Do you mind saying what that is?
I can tell you what it is. I mean, it's Samba Safety. I do love that, but you get a lot of information in regards to your drivers and their performance. And you're able to input things. You're able to do customized scoring. You're able to, create a risk matrix that aligns with your risk appetite. But I think you have to be honest. We're in a critical shortage of drivers. I grew up in driving and I grew up in industries where they were very selective of drivers. That's not our hour right now. We have had a lot of challenges with just recruiting and retaining drivers. I don't think PODS is singular in that. Walmart offering $100,000 to a driver tells you all that you need to know about just the hour that we're in regards to recruiting and retaining some of the safest drivers. And so you have to be smart about what the data is telling you. You also may have to adjust down your risk appetite a little bit. I'm not saying yes or no to how we do it, because I think you leave a lot of stuff too. There are some things on the World Wide Web that you can ascertain, and I'm always going to tell people to go out there and do research about any company that you're interested in going to work for. But at the end of the day, because there is enough out there in the public domain, even if it's OSHA Establishment Search, even if it's EPA, even if, if you're an environmental role, even if you're coming to a company that's a carrier, DOT, CSA, SMS Basic, Safer System, it gives you a lot of information on the companies that you're willing, that you're entertaining to go and work for. Rome was never built in a day. And you also can't put a company out of business. So there's always going to be some risk that a company not that they just rubber stamp, but that they say, okay, this is the cost of doing business. But where we can mitigate risk, we're going to. And I think a lot of it is focusing on the things that will, I heard something at a conference in the gas industry called sticky stuff that kills you. We don't say stuff on my team, but you get the gist. You're going to focus a lot on SIFs, serious injuries and fatalities, things that could be nuclear from a customer footprint standpoint. And you're going to mitigate those risks down because you never could sit in front of a court of law and say, well, I knew all this, but so you're going to look at the obvious things that are disqualifiers, but you also have breadcrumbs of repeat behavior and how you're going to risk rank that. And so that's where the safety professional just has to be savvy with how they're using the data. Everybody's going to look at a driver and have a difference of opinion. But something that I do is that I've done now at the last 3 companies is I have a driver authorization process where we actually risk rank every single type of behavior and we implemented custom scoring. So here at Pods, every driver knows where they stand. They know if they're in the top quartile. They know if they're in the bottom quartile. Every year we talk to you about how you risk rank. When we're doing the feds require us to do an annual review, we sit down and say, hey, Fran, you have X number of PODS points. This is not to be confused with your MVR points or your PSP points. Here are your PODS safety points in regards to your driving behavior. These are the things that we're either going to continue to authorize you to operate in a safety sensitive manner, or we're going to remove your privilege. That's just I just gave you kind of the Fran playbook. Use the data, look at what the driver's behavior is actually telling you about that driver, and then govern accordingly.
Basically, you just laid out this really clear kind of framework and conviction around how you can have the biggest impact from a transportation hazard perspective, and that can have a huge impact on an organization. And I think that kind of clearly demonstrates that when you come into an organization, and I'm sure part of the reason that you were hired at Pods is that you have this clear vision for how you can have the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time. So what I'm curious to know is, as you look at building this team, which as you discussed is still pretty fresh, before we get into the mechanics of hiring themselves, what are the pieces that you look to put in place as early as possible so that you could start to have an impact quickly? I'm just very, very curious to know, where do you start?
So obviously, I was able to do the head start. So you're going to do your analysis of the organization, and then you're going to place assets in places based upon the need. And so sometimes you're not as lucky to be able to say, okay, I'm going to place the strongest person here because you still are out in the market shopping, right? And your spend based on what you can pay dictates your quality to some degree. But you really want to place people where they can utilize their talents, and you want to find strong candidates for areas of extreme need if you can. Your goal is to really to know the organization and what the organization needs. I hope that when people get the opportunity to hire, they don't just say, oh, I'm going to hire a friend because I know her. No, I'm looking at the company is giving you money. They're expecting a return, and you need to be a good steward over that resource so that if you're going to be, I've never had the luxury of being a terrible, mediocre safety person and not performing. I have my Fran Slam book where I don't tell you what I could do. I show you what I have done. Some of it has been in publicly traded companies. So I always hire with that in mind. Like, Fran, you're not going to get 29 chances to improve this organization. You can't guarantee anything, but the organization is going to want to know that the money that they gave you is making marked improvements in some areas. And so when I'm hiring, I'm doing a lot of that. Obviously, I'm going to be transparent to the candidates of anything they want to know about me. I make them interview me and shift that conversation to, what do you want to know about Fran? Because we need to have some symbiosis. We need to be able to work together. You need to be able to trust me. You need to be able to believe in me and be inspired to some degree by the vision that I'm setting. You may not love me, but you got to love the seat that I'm occupying, right? And so, or have a respect for that seat. And so I'm looking at all of those things. And I think I do that. I've gotten complimented since about 2007 about, Fran, you build the most diverse teams. I don't know how you do it. You just are very selective about the people. And I think sometimes it's a gut factor too. I'm listening to what is not being said, like us being on camera today. Body language is telling you, is she comfortable with this question or is she shrieking back at this question? And sometimes people will give you the half-hearted yes, but their body language is saying hell no. And I think you can't ignore that. And then pre-COVID, I would actually be in person because I want to see you in your natural state. And I don't expect perfection. And so for me, I'm using a lot of my Franisms, things that have allowed me to transcend through the world. Because I'm packaged differently, right? And so I'm supposed to look at the world different because I am different. And so that is how I use a lot of what I know to be factual. The resume is not exactly who Joe is. There are lots of other things outside of that resume that Joe is telling me. And so you have to be observant. And I can't turn it off, which is so bad because I just came from vacation and you just watch people. And my husband be like, how did you get all that from that? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just a studier of people, I guess. And so that is really kind of what works for me. It's not really even a prescription.
I want to just take a step back. So you mentioned before that you are this, when you're making those key decisions, you're coming in, you're doing that analysis, and then, you see yourself as almost, a steward of those resources. You're triaging and saying, this is the budget I've got allocated. What are the skill sets I'm going to need to add to this equation so that I can have the biggest impact against the company's goals? And I think that makes a ton of sense. What I'm curious to know is, in your experience, is that something that are you making that call yourself, or is this a matter of you doing that analysis and then going back to a leadership group and saying, based on my analysis, this is what I see as the places we can have a biggest impact, and then getting some buy-in on that? Or how does that work?
So it's so funny. I guess it seems like you were in the room here. They had a position amount budgeted for this role. And so when I first came to this role, a lot of, you go on the Triple L tour, look, listen, learn. I actually had to justify upgrading the role based on the level of service that the leaders, the organization needed in safety. They had a number budgeted and I was like, yeah, this is what you're going to buy in the market. Here's the analysis. And here's why you don't need this level of practitioner, and how the cost of safety has gone way up to include, hiring professionals. So I had to justify and write a justification on these are the levels, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 plus. You didn't go 10 plus. And then I had to say, here is the succession plan. You need a 10 plus person, at least one that you're going to pay at the higher end, because if I leave you tomorrow, voluntarily or involuntarily, you have continuity. But because budget is essential, I can get you the future, which is the 0 to 5. Because that is critical. You want to hire the future as well. Somebody where it's a little leap, not necessarily a quantum leap, but it's a good wage, a good opportunity to learn, and you're placing them on the track. And then you want this as this level of professional because you need to see results. So that, I just gave you the whole Franism of how I looked at it here. And then our street supervisors, you needed those folks to triage drivers who potentially were in trouble now that you couldn't wrap training around because you needed some intervention today. And so that was really what I sat down and went back to senior leaders, and they bought it. They were like, okay, you really put a lot of thought into it and it makes complete sense. But I have done this everywhere. This is not just isolated to pause. If you're giving me money to hire, I want you to feel good about what we're bringing in, that it is a diversity to reflect the people that we actually employ too. Sometimes people hire in a vacuum. They want people and voices that look and sound exactly like them, and they negate the fact that the workforce doesn't look like them. And so if I'm trying to sell you something, I want you to sell it to some degree with people who have some similarities. And that makes the trek a little easier if you can. I just think we should be looking at diversity of ages, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of skill sets. Diversity is key in hiring. When you hire people who sound, look, think like you're at your ceiling. No new ideas are going to come in that space because everybody's like you. Everybody's had your shared experience. And so That's really what my team looks like. It's a bunch of us that are all so doggone different. And I think that's why you're seeing the success, because where some person is weak in something, somebody can pull a tool out and say, hey, I used this before. Hey, what do you think about this? So you're getting a continuum of ideas, not just a vacuum of just our voices saying, do this, do that. And I even look at diversity in education, lack of education. My mentor doesn't have a degree. I mean, I tell people this all the time, because sometimes life skills for people is what, now he's military, but it's way more valuable sometimes than being able to just sit up under a degree process. I think it is room for everything. And I think the best companies think about all those things.
There's a lot to dig into there. And I think that you're being able to go back and I think make those presentations around, to a certain extent, eliminating that sort of top down, I'm a safety expert, this is the budget I need, but simply laying out that logic for those who might not be, experts in this space so that they can really understand what their money's buying them. I think that that's something that seems so straightforward when you hear it, but I think a lot of folks probably don't do, and then get frustrated when they can't get the resources they need to be successful. So I think that's something that, again, if anybody's not doing that, probably a super, super valuable tactic to put in place that ultimately probably doesn't take that much work, a lot less time than it's going to take you to do all the interviews and do all the hiring anyway. So that makes a ton of sense. Now, you mentioned that you have this, that you really pride yourself on the diversity in all aspects of the teams that you lead. So now what I want to understand is, when you start looking at hiring out a team, what are the things that you're doing to attract that talent? So you mentioned that having a certain degree of idea of these are the comps for having a 10 plus person versus a 0 to 5 person on a financial level. That's a part of it. But I think anybody who's done any sort of hiring, as you said, money's only one piece of the puzzle. So what are the things that you've done over the last, several months, and I guess earlier in your career, to make sure that you're hiring a team with the skill sets and perspectives that you're looking for?
So in a job, you're only going to get 3 things: pay, location, and job satisfaction. If you get all 3, that's your perfect job. You should stay forever. And most of us only get 2 of the 3. And so I think when I learned that really early on, it became a lot easier to navigate the space of what the job was bringing. Instead of you having this long laundry list, you got your 3, because we tend to associate work with worth, depending upon the environment, the operating environment, what the job pays. It's not telling you what you're actually worth. I had that struggle years ago, in full transparency, like, I'm worth more and I just feel worth. No, it's what the comps are paying at that time. I graduated in a bad economy. You could feel really bad about yourself, like some kids that are graduating now. So do not equivocate that.
Just to interject here for 1 second before you keep going, I think there might be a fourth here, and I want to know if you agree or not, which is time. I've lived in Montreal, very European influenced city in North America, where I think folks there would very much add time as a fourth option. There's a lot of places here where companies shut down on Fridays because folks really value that. Do you think that that's also a piece of it? I guess, especially in this remote world.
Yes, I think you could add autonomy in time, where you have control over the time. These are newer concepts now, because I'm a little older. I'm dating myself. You didn't get remote work and some of these things that were, the pandemic kind of has shifted. Of course it should have shifted, the way we do work. And so because you have those eras in our country where work continued to shift from children to women because of the war to, all the things, right? So the workplace is constantly evolving, and I agree with you. So add to your list. Back in the day, those were the 3. Today, it could be a whole lot of other stuff. Yeah.
I used to work in offshore oil and gas. And so I was looking at the 3. The money was great, but the location was horrible because I was in the middle of the ocean. There was not an incredible amount of job satisfaction. But what I did get was a lot of time. I got 6 months vacation a year. So I was like, I think time, it's evolved into something different in the remote workspace. But I said, I think time might be the fourth component, that the whole default, 40 hours a week on paper is, I think, changing all the time. So anyway.
And I think people too kind of house that under satisfaction a little bit too. And then we don't even talk about stuff that is actually housed under satisfaction. Like, do you like the leader you work for? Do you trust them? Would you run into a wall for them because you believe in them so much? People tend to think about satisfaction as just the company, the environment. For me, at this juncture in my career, it's the person I'm working for. That is completely tied to my satisfaction. And I think that would, it goes under stuff like agency. Do they allow you to be your full self, bring your full self to work? Autonomy. Do they give you complete control over things that are within your scope of services, your book of services and your expertise? Do they give you hybrid and remote options and flexibility? In the event that if you do have a family, my kids are grown now, do you feel always like your kids are a burden because your responsibilities at work are so much? But I definitely think you could break it out. Satisfaction can be broken out into a ton of things. And I think, in just reading the things that we're reading in the hour of the Great Resignation and looking at why people are moving and why people are staying, all these things are coming to play to include flexibility and hybrid. One of the articles that I read recently talked about the fact that 29% of people said that they would stay if they actually would have more flexibility. So you may be onto something. I applaud this new generation.
My 4, just based on, and I think I've had a bit of this is something I've thought a lot about because I transitioned from, I would say, a fairly old school, traditional work environment, and then now working in the technology space, which is the other end of the spectrum. And I think it's forced me to be really thoughtful about, I guess, where my biases and expectations lie and where, I guess, not allowing the things that I'm most familiar with to kind of influence my decision making too much. And I think my updated 3 components there would be 4, and it would be money, location, fulfillment. So that's the kind of company. Do you love the work? And then balance. And that could be however you define it. It's, can you take Fridays off to take your kids to soccer? Or anyway, not to get too sidelined, I guess every leader to a certain degree is defining these for themselves. What I want to understand from you is, with these, whatever these things are, but what with these key indicators or these key incentives for people to work on your team, when you're looking at hiring, which I think is something that, again, in the world of the Great Resignation, everybody's looking for people. Wages are certainly getting very competitive, but that's not, as we've just discussed, that's not the whole story. What are you doing when you're going through a hiring process, or, hiring 10 people in the last 6 months or whatever it's been? How are you communicating these with potential candidates? I guess that's what it all comes down to, because you're going to have your opinions about what they should be, and you're going to create that package. How do you make sure that you're communicating that package effectively to a prospective hire?
One thing I love to do is I love to ask people in the interview, what are your non-negotiables? And working for me, what are the things that, whether it's morally, whether it is, what are your non-negotiables? And that's something that I didn't start doing until later in my career, where I will say, I'm going to answer the phone every time my kids call. That is non-negotiable. I worked in an environment where you could not step out and take a phone call from your kid. And, I am going to be available to my kids for whatever, because that is a non-negotiable. If it's weekend work, I can do some work on weekends, but if my kids were playing in a soccer championship, I will put that down as a non-negotiable, because work is always going to be here. This championship is only going to be a one-time thing. So understanding what your things that are off the table. Some people are caring for elderly parents. They may have a disabled child. They may have another circumstance, and they need to be able to communicate what are their non-negotiables. And then I'm going to ask them, where are they trying to take their career? And I'm going to commit to them that I'm going to do something to help them. Because I think that a lot of times we tell people what we want from them, what we expect from them, but we don't tell them what is in it for them. And then I have even gone back to a person who said they wanted to be a VP. I was a VP. So I'll tell a quick anecdote. I was a VP. It's a real story. And the guy under me was like, one day I want to do your job. So I brought him to the worst project, because we were having a meltdown of a project. And he was so angry, by day 3, like, this is crazy. He wasn't saying crazy. This is BS. And he was just, why did you bring me here? And we went to lunch. I said, let's go to lunch. I was like, what did you tell me during your interview? You wanted to be a VP. VPs take the toughest assignments. They're responsible for it all. How can you want this, but don't want the experience to get you here? And his attitude completely changed. And if he's listening, he will say, she sure told me that. It's like, you can't pick and choose the hard stuff because you think the VP is glamorous. I stay up all night thinking about the stuff that you think is BS. I flew here 2 weeks ago on a Sunday because it was melting down, and so I'm going to listen to what they tell me where they're trying to go. And then I'm going to push them in that direction. And then if they get another opportunity, I'm quickly telling them in an interview, I want you here. But if you've outgrown this place and if you are not happy and if you get another opportunity, I'm still going to be your biggest cheerleader because I'm believing in you, not just the company's role that you're fulfilling. I'm hiring you and I want what's best for you and you know what's best for you. So if you're happy about it, I'm going to support it, whether it hampers our team, whether we have to replace you or whatever. And I think that people believe that over time. And I try to embody that and be an ambassador of that. I brought one person here with me, nobody else. Other people asked. And he's like, why did you bring me? I'm like, because I believe in everything. You're showing me what you told me many years ago when we first started working together. And I want you to be always on the track to fly, and so if I'm going to be able to if I feel that I can create an opportunity for you to be able to go down the path that you want to go, then I'll open that door for you. Some people who wanted to come, this was not their opportunity. This was not in alignment with where they're saying they're trying to go. Maybe they're just unhappy, but unhappiness spawns growth too. You can't remove people from every unhappy situation. You have to allow growth to, mature. And so people call me, oh, I need to get out of here. Why? You're going to see the same things here. So I don't want you to get an unreasonable expectation that you're going to come here and it's going to be all daisies and roses and, good days. Because when you're trying to shift culture, it is hard work and you're going to have setbacks. Progress is never linear up a hill, right? And so really, I'm believing in the people and what they say they're trying to do. And that is a part of, too, how you build a team to keep the team together. Another thing, I'll knock on wood, on most of my teams, I have very little turnover because I think you get people who are aligned with the vision and their vision for themselves fits nicely into the vision you're trying to create. And so I know it sounds all philosophical, but it's true. If you have people who just want to job hop because they want more and they're not going to be happy wherever you bring them.
You never have to apologize for being philosophical, Fran. That is my bread and butter. Fundamentally, I think what you're talking about there is expectation management. It's what are your expectations and how do I make sure that I'm delivering or not delivering, understanding if somebody's non-negotiables don't line up with what your company can provide, even if they're the best candidate, they're probably not a sensible hire. I'm curious, and we don't need to spend too much time here, but is there anything that you're doing in particular before the interview and maybe beyond that? One of the things that I think a lot about in my capacity is actually more on the sourcing side. Is how do I make sure the right people are getting to the interview? Is there anywhere that you're looking right now, again, whether it be for safety professionals or hiring more generally, that you're using to make sure that the best candidates know that your job exists?
I actually, for pods, use personal invites in LinkedIn, unbelievably, where I source candidates in certain geographies and I sent them a note to, just about what we were looking for. And so for me, I did the personal touch. We had recruiter staffing looking, but I took it into my hands too, to source for things that I was looking for. And LinkedIn has an amazing search, capacity. I think people sleep on that sometimes. And so that's what I did. And for the people who wrote me back, we started organic conversations about, but I was very transparent with what we were trying to do, that it was going to be an upward climb, but that they would be surrounded by peers and they, that they were interested in the opportunity. I think, we could have a very in-depth conversation to make sure we're a fit for each other. So I had sourcers and recruiters doing a whole bunch of stuff, but I would just source in areas on LinkedIn geographically, looking at university people or looking at the particular industries and just sourcing and looking at a diversity of, data points using that. But most people use their internal sourcers, their recruiters, executive recruiters, managerial recruiters, whatever. And they're using that because they use sourcing, but, it was my team. I wanted to have a more personal involvement in it. So I was saying, hey, call this candidate or see if this candidate is interested. And so, yeah.
Gotcha. And what would you say to folks who think that it sounds great, but they don't have time for it? Do you have any opinions on that?
Don't you want the team that you want? Do you want to keep hiring over and over and over? I think you have to put some of your sweat into it. You're creating the team environment. You've been given the budget. There is an accountability on your role to produce. And so you don't have to have a lot of time to do some sourcing.
Did you get company support in that, or were you just using your personal LinkedIn account? Like, did you pay for a recruiter account, or were you just saying, hey, sourcing team, here's a couple people who look like they could be a great fit. Go chase after them. What did that look like?
So I had the pro account. And so because you have the pro account, it does give you a little more functionality. I mean, the free account is still good. LinkedIn has something, right? If it's utilized properly, it is a network of professionals. But I did tell the company what I was doing. That's one thing about me is I'm always going to be very upfront, transparent. Like I'm looking for a certain type of professional, and safety is a niche profession. And, our job is to know what our market is doing, right? But we all know that there are some people out there who just have bounced around in safety. They may meet your posting, but they're not what you're looking for. So me and my recruiter, we were really in sync. My managerial recruiter inside of Pods, we were very in sync about me doing some operation research. So that was just that, I'm always going to be very transparent in that. And it worked for us. So
you mentioned knowing what our market is doing, and I want to get into a relatively juicy topic here, which is, again, we talked about those sort of key components. We talked about maybe redefining them. How are we incentivizing people to work on our team? So you get that package together, but one of the most obvious pieces of that package is cash. So based on the experience that you've recently gone through, would you be able to give us a kind of state of the industry today as it relates to comps? What are the numbers out there that you're seeing today? Because I'm sure whether you're a safety professional reviewing your own compensation or somebody looking to hire, folks might be surprised by what the current numbers are.
Yeah, I actually just encouraged somebody to finish a safety degree, and I'm thinking people with steady work history, certain industries, of course, can be new practitioners walking in with about 70K. And so that is a big difference in the market. That's a 0-year practitioner. 0 to 2 or 3 years is about 70K. If you are really good at what you do, you probably are going to be 6-figured around year 5, where it took me probably the first 10 years to see my first $100,000 graduating in the 90s. These practitioners now can see that much sooner. Also, they're subject to bonus incentives, something that I didn't see until about year 9 or 8 in my career. Now, I was fortunate because I got the CSP early. So I've been certified since 2001. I didn't keep my ASP, but I achieved my ASP in 2001, which was right exactly 6 years after graduating college. And then people struggled with the old test. So that's another thing, right? They struggled with the old test, where I just was fortunate. I am a good test taker. And so I was certified right out the gate. And so if you get a GSP, because some of these ABET schools are giving you a certification as soon as you're out the door, you could be 70, 75. I've seen offers for 80,000 coming in the door. The market is doing a little bit of different things right now as it pertains to safety professionals, because COVID made companies realize that safety was a critical piece of their organization. I know we talked about us having a new CEO, but I don't even know how much of her decision making factored in because of COVID, and how safety now came to the forefront of just organizations. Where safety had kind of been operational partner, it now had a real leadership seat at the table because COVID was impacting so many workplaces, and still is today. We're back in mask in some industries because of just the widespread of Omicron. And so that has triggered the market having to pay a little more when there's some expertise there.
70K sort of entry level coordinator, associate, whatever you want to call it, level position. When you're looking at that sort of 100K plus, is that you're kind of looking at managers generally?
New managers, they have 5 years of managing, some regulations under their belt. Doesn't mean they're great people. They may not have a team to lead, but they may be managing a program. So let's be clear. You're probably not going to supervise unless you're just on a fast track. My first supervisory position, let me count back. So it was 2004. That was like year 9. I started supervising people, which is crazy. And then I've been supervising ever since. But that is a different skill set, right? Just because you can manage a program and manage regulatory requirements does not mean that you're in the people leadership, that you're going to master people leadership. So that 5 to 10 year practitioner, what I'm seeing in the market sometimes is they don't manage people. They are sole contributors, but they manage a segment of the programs. They may do all of the mandatory reporting. They may, present in front of leadership, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to manage a team of people. So when you get to that 10 year plus and you're into managing people, you hope companies are still about 8+ years. And now you've been a good steward over managing programs. You're trustworthy, you're reliable. And now we can phase you into the people management. So some of that is still kind of the nuts and bolts of our industry, but COVID, because of, what has happened, people, I read the National Safety Council's Job Outlook 2022 and included some salary information. They're saying people are able to move around and safety is no different. Safety experienced the great resignation too. People are job hopping to get more money. You just hope, because people's lives depend upon us understanding, lots of things and being able to apply not just laws, but logic, right? You just hope that some of the companies who are promoting folks really understand the gravity. Hopefully COVID made them understand the gravity of bad decision making, leading to an outbreak and people being sick and people dying, how important and vital our jobs are, even if it's just managing vehicles on the road, being able to decide when a driver should be pulled. A lot of that stuff, you want to have some methodology behind it, and experience brings that.
Once you get past that sort of 5 to 10 year, do you have any insight as far as comps, or is that it's really a kind of it's specific to the individual and the organization?
I think industry drives it. The higher risky footprint, the more money, the more hazards you're trying to mitigate, the more money. Also to specialization. We don't talk enough in safety anymore about specialization. People want to be these generalist people, but over time, your career kind of pushes you and propels you in directions that, we're not good at everything. Safety covers a variety of things. Just because people can work in a diversity of roles doesn't mean they're good at those. And I think you have to start having honest conversations with yourself. But as far as pay, really, I think it's attributed to some of the higher hazard footprints. I've seen jobs off the charts for 10-year people, but the hazards are there. And sometimes they're asking you for a lot of expertise and a lot of experience. Something in my career is I've changed industries a lot because I'm a lifelong learner of safety. I'm a lover of safety, but I'm a learner of safety. So pause is a new thing I'm learning. I was in the gas utility. I had never been in gas utility. Similarities to water utility, but not the same. I went into the parks and entertainment space for about a 3-year because I wanted to learn. So I'm not necessarily married to an industry because I love safety and I want to see what safety can do broadly. And so I'm willing to learn. But I think me getting my PhD and just availing myself continuously to learning processes kind of speaks about me, but this ain't about me. I think you find what you feel you're good at. Sometimes the things we like, we're not that good at. Oh, I love this, but you suck at it, right? You can be good at it if you invest the time to learning in it, but find what you're good at and then capitalize on that. And if you're able to drive change and drive sustainable change and make big differences, not just in rates, but in dollars, because dollars is easily measured. Rates could be subjective, but dollars are the easiest way. Safety is a measurable science. And so find what you're good at drawing change in and kind of gravitate to that and be able to show your footprint and your worth. I think we live in that age where we can use data to our advantage too. So yeah.
as somebody who's quite credentialed, again, you mentioned your PhD, you got your CSP early, all that other stuff. How important do you think that piece of the puzzle is as you're looking at hiring safety professionals? Is that a non-negotiable for you? Is that something that, I guess, how do you look at that side of the equation?
So a degree tells me one thing about you. That's it. It tells me that you start a process and you finished it. That's it. It don't tell me how good you were at it. You could tell me what your GPA is, but I don't know what the rigor was, right? Because rigor is different from school to school. A degree just tells me you start a path and you finish it. So that is a data point, right? But what you have selected to do and what you have availed yourself to become good at, that is much, much different than just saying I have a degree. Safety is a broad field. So people do endeavor into different segments of safety until they kind of find their niche. And when they find their niche that they really like, then now specialization is important, because you can tell me how great you are. Your credentials tell me how serious you are. If you're certified in transportation, which I am, it tells me you're serious about that. You are keeping up with that. It's not just, oh, I'm checking the box. I'm availing myself to continuous education to keep that. And so again, it's another data point. I look at that, but sometimes people are academics, and I think sometimes PhDs get a bad rap because people think you're just academic and you're not execution and tactical. So then they're like, damn, she's executional and tactical and she reads all the time and she just wants to know. But I'm a lover of safety. Safety found me. It was my background. I grew up very insecure, very unsafe. And I've seen a lot of crazy things. And so safety, if you're somewhat of a control freak, you want to control the uncontrollables, safety is a good fit. But I just think my background caused me to be so focused on safety. Safety is in the prevention side. When I was growing up, I couldn't prevent a lot of things. I couldn't make myself have safety and security. And so now I pledge my life to doing that for others as it pertains to being at work. And so for me, it's because of my love for vid. So that's what drives me. I want to protect as many people as possible. I was crying for humanity during COVID, not just the people I'm working with. I mean, my family was like, Fran is going to have a mental breakdown, because every day I saw those numbers and I just was cringing, like, we got to get in front of this, and I'm talking to the TV and nobody's here talking back, because I saw that growing up. So a part of that is triggering, right? To see things that are initially it was uncontrolled, and so that kind of gives you an insight into Fran. This is my life. This is not just a career choice for me. I think I will always be doing something even after I step away, because I only want to do this traditional corporate life for another 10 years. And then I want to step away and do more philanthropic things, because at heart, I'm a philanthropist. I started, I got Sisters of Safety. I do Deals and Dreams, where I'm sponsoring girls to college, underserved girls to college. I started SWOC, Safety Women of Color. And so I'm just trying to create something that is making an impact, because I do think that there is a market for safety women of color. Women are nurturing. Safety is a nurture science. People don't want to believe that. And so I think I'm trying to live what safety means to me. This is not just a job for me. I can't make people do that. Safety is lucrative. One of my best friends in safety who's passed away, we went to Murray State together. He put on his license tag, safety pays. And I just used to die, because he had a Mercedes at that time, and that was his license plate. Safety pays. Safety is lucrative. It is a career field that continues to give. And if you invest time and expertise, you will be handsomely rewarded.
Hopefully everyone listening to this agrees with that sentiment. As a podcast for, safety leaders and safety professionals, I think that's something that everybody understands to some degree. Yeah, well, I think all that stuff, and I think what you're talking about around your, let's say, personal mission outside of hiring more broadly, I think that what you're doing here to a certain degree and making sure that people know that and associate those values with you, I think can be, just to circle this back to hiring, can be one of the most impactful things you can do. Because as you said, one of the things that can be most influential on your satisfaction at work is your relationship with your leader. So I think for leadership to get those messages out there and talk about what they believe in, that they're not just somebody who sits in an office and demands reports at the end of every month, that they have opinions and they have convictions. That's such a huge part of who we are as people. I think that can be, finding a way to communicate that with people can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I think storytelling, we went on this storytelling journey. DuPont started talking about it probably in about 11 or 12. That was something when I was selected as a Rising Star of Safety that they started talking about telling your story, telling your story. And I think safety people kind of pivoted. And the best leaders do tell stories, even indirectly, I think. But I think your life is always telling the story. People, they have running jokes. Fran's gonna drive by the rules. She's gonna follow every stop sign. And I had to tell them sometimes, like, hey, I have picked up my phone before. It's not a practice, but I've picked it up before. And then they'll ride with me and say, Fran is gonna stop at every light. And they'll say, but I'm like, we're getting there like right within minutes of each other. So really, they have running jokes like, ride with Fran. You'll learn something and I critique everybody's driving because it's just driving is a passion of mine about you're not going to kill me in this car, right? You're going to put on your seatbelt, put your phone down, give it to me. I'll answer it for you, and so I think your life and your lifestyle and the things you do every day, people watch that more than the words we say. And so I'm hopeful that I'm telling the right story for safety. Sometimes my kids say my mom is paranoid for a living. They was like, she thinks of the worst for a living. That's what she gets paid to do. So they hate that because I'll be like, look, such and such, such works at safety at Universal, and that particular roller coaster don't have good stats. Don't ride it. And they're looking at me like, Ma, this is an amusement park. So I guess you do have to balance it. But you just hope that people are saying she takes this seriously. Things that I have talked to employees about when they've done unsafe things. I'm not saying, oh, you did this. I'm saying, how many kids you got? Who's your significant other? Think about that. Think about that call. I'm not going to talk about what you did because you know what you did. You're an adult. You internalize it. But when you take that risk, think about who I'm going to have to call. Don't worry about how I'm going to have to call them, but think about how they're going to receive that message about you. Or I say stuff like, do you have people that love you? Because really at the end of the day, if you got people that love you, you're always doing what you do for them. So I don't even need to beat you over the head with what you did wrong. I just want you to think about the people who are in your life now. And so that sometimes I think is a more resounding message when we are talking about safety and living and embodying it than you need to put on your eyeglasses. You need to I'm not into that. I'm into the humanity part of it. Think about the call I'm going to have to make it. Who's going to answer the phone and how are they going to take that?
I think so much of it, to me, the whole local rationality theory, the idea that everybody's just making a decision that makes sense to them in the moment universally, and that it's our job to improve the quality of those decisions. I think when people talk about, reminding folks about their families and things like that, I mean, that's all you're trying to do is influence the things that person's going to think about when they choose to make a decision. As it relates to all these values, one thing that I just want to double tap on, and as I'm sitting here talking to you, I think maybe we'll do a separate episode on this with this particular company that I'm familiar with, but with hiring in particular, I'm a big believer that there's a huge cultural shift, and I think that's happening with this great recession and with everything else that we, like all decisions folks are making in the modern day, with the advent of the internet and the way that everybody, you have access to so much information all the time. I believe, and this is me not acting as an interviewer, but speaking from my own personal soapbox, that people today, they're making a huge percent of their hiring decision before they ever talk to you, based on the research they want to do on the company. And I think that's also what can be really powerful in helping people be interested in a certain company. So with all this said, I think as people are looking to hire, if you can look at ways to creatively communicate those things that everybody's going to want to understand, what is your mission in safety? Why do you do what you do? What are the ways that how do you communicate internally? All those little things that you're curious on in an interview. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is I think there's a lot of ways that you can communicate that asynchronously as part of your outreach process. And I think that can be something that's really, really powerful in helping you get in touch with the best candidates. I think in the safety world, nobody does this. So it's a really powerful differentiator. So for anybody listening, and again, it's a vehicle that could be used to communicate everything that you just communicated, Fran, around, again, hey, this is my background. This is why I'm really passionate about safety, or this is why we choose to focus on the things that we choose to focus on at company X. There's a company, very techy, but it's called Before You Apply. And basically what they do, it's just beforeyouapply.com, and they help companies. I'm not associated with them at all, but I think what they're doing is really cool. And they help you create a series of videos and host it for you that answers all these questions. And I think in any sort of competitive hiring market, giving your potential candidates an advantage from an information perspective can only help you. And it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, Fran, when you talked about what you're trying to do in that very first interview process is about expectation setting. Well, you might be able to save yourself the 1 hour of sitting in an interview with a candidate you know is not going to work out because they figured that out on their own before anything happened. So anyway, just a tactic that we use. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Another thing too is I always tell candidates, Google me. Know who you're working for. Know what they're about. There is a lot of, the information highway is underrated. Just like I'm Googling the companies and I'm looking at everything and I'm voraciously, going through information and trying to decide if, I've even turned down interviews like I'm not interested. I saw your risk footprint. I saw, some of the things you're endeavoring in, but you have to say it in a nicer way. Like, I respectfully, decline further consideration. Thank you so much for this opportunity. The world of safety is small. I'm sure we'll cross paths again. Wishing you Godspeed, the best, whatever, that is, and staffing your role. But something about me too is I wrote a kid's book on safety recently, and it did kind of good on Amazon, and I'm going to give it away free every year during Childhood Injury Prevention Week. And so I think people kind of get the gist when they Google you, like, man, she is having her hands, like my Sisters of Safety gave out masks and face shields during the pandemic early on because we thought that was optimal protection. Out of my own money, I'm doing things to kind of move people forward in the safety space. So I think people need to research the people they're working for. Because I think there is information out there and your prospective leaders should say, Google me, look up everything you want to know about me that's out there. And you'll get a gist of just who you're coming to work for and what they have done and how serious they are. Now, not everybody's going to do that. Some people have very vanilla, no real flavor as far as their web footprint, and for rightful reasons, because the web is crazy. Your digital, imagery sometimes is non-controlled. I don't do a lot on social, so they probably are like, dang, she really don't, because who has time when you're trying to save the world, right? But what people can see is what is there. They can see the things I've spoken about. They can look at the talks that I've given. They can look at the prior podcasts to kind of know who Fran is. They can hear the things that they need to hear to say, can I survive working for that person? I think we underrate our leader in being in that top 3 of satisfaction. For me, a good leader, oh my God, that's jet fuel, right? And to your career and to your life, because this is not just your career. This is your doggone life. You spend more time. If you live to be 90, you will have spent 30 years sleeping, hopefully you get your 30 years working, and 30 years trying to do everything else for your family, but you will only have a third of the time to be the real person you are. Everything else is allotted. You got to have sleep. You're not going to give that up. Your body requires wiring and resetting and rejuvenating. Hopefully you're not giving that up. And you are going to give the other 8 or more, because most people are not working a static 8-hour day, to a job. And so this is your life. This is not just a career choice. This is your life. And you're giving a substantial portion away to a company, even if it is a short tenure. And so it's important for you to know who you're going into business with, just like they're researching you and your background.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I think that's something that I think more and more people are thinking about, and I think companies are having to reckon with. So one thing I want to touch on, and I'm conscious that, we've hopefully it's not evident in the edit, but we've had some audio issues here. I know we're way over time, and I appreciate you being so patient with us, Fran. But what I want to know, we've talked a lot about hiring here. Do you have any insights as somebody who, again, has thought deeply about this and I think has given us a good overview of where the market is today? Do you have any projections on how hiring in the safety space is going to change 5 years from now?
Oh, it's going to change. I did a podcast recently about just the new generations and how they're going to demand more in different ways for us in safety. You know, we have some of us who started in the industry a long time and who have not continued to pivot have a very limited toolbox when it comes to the digital touch type text age and just being able to interact with people who are in a diversity of generations. The most recent workforce over the age of 5 is already born. They're going to be so super far ahead of just what they expect. You know, think about just all the changes in the last 10 years, the transparency around food labeling, the clean food initiative, the CrossFit initiative, the fitness, the mindfulness. That was a shift for some safety people. They were just like, these kids. And it's like, no, I love to see it. Like you talked about, the flexibility of work, the hybridness, the being available, but also having autonomy over where they do the work. That's going to change our profession. It is already changing our profession. I did a couple talks on just the changes in generations, and so many people lined up to talk to me after it. Cause I really had to endeavor in the research to talk about just the difference between millennials and Gen Z. And now you got the alpha generation, how they want safety, how they want to feel included in workplace decisions. COVID kind of showed you that. You know, you see this new generation using words like toxic. You see this new generation saying, you know, this doesn't work for me. I taught at the university while getting my PhD. I did that for 2 years for a real reason, because I wanted to know the tempo of just the type of safety people that we're building at the university level. And whoa, was I like blown back. Innovative? Yes. You know, innovative? Yes. I created a virtual reality lab and I did some virtual reality training stuff just because I was teaching. That was a part of my research too, actually. If you only have 2 to 3 minutes to relay a risk-based concept to teens, do they prefer VR? Do they prefer video? Or do they prefer the facts, you know, via a PowerPoint? And so we're going to have to pivot how we relay information, how we teach risk adversity, how we include people in our risk making processes. And so that is not just going to be communicating differently. That's going to be changing how we frame safety differently. The regulations are old. They are very prescriptive on some of those. It's taken OSHA an average of about 40 years to propel the safety regulatory rulemaking body forward. That is too long to write a regulation. They continue to write opinions versus writing regulations, but society is going to start writing those through their actions. And so we're all going to be in an era of unknown, and it's going to require us to shift our thinking about how we see safety in the future. And some of this stuff that we think we have to cover in regs, it's going to be demanded and implied. You're going to do this. People are not going to die at work. You're going to be beat up on social media if somebody dies at work. Right now, social media drives public perception. And so we're all having to think about the importance of our roles and how we shift that to deal with the future. So, it's going to be different.
What do you think companies should be doing today to prepare themselves for that change?
Becoming more transparent. Safety is a tangible. OSHA tried to do this rulemaking where you post your stats, and the whole public work domain was, no, we don't want to tell people how many people we injured. We don't want to tell people how many people we killed. You better start getting ready to start talking about that, because this new generation, just like they demanded transparency in food and all these other things, we can think that we can roll back regs and that's going to matter. We're going to be in an economy where regs don't matter as much. You're seeing a lot of the rollback. And so public perception is going to drive how people see companies, who they do business with. And it's just going to be a different way to operate. And we're going to have to be more transparent, more truthful, more open. And we're going to have to learn how to talk to them in the language that they prefer. And they don't all the time prefer face-to-face, interactions. That could be different. And we're going to have to pivot, whether we like it or we don't. That's the hour we're in.
I think that that's so insightful. And I think if you wait for the regulators, they're going to make you do it in a way that you don't want to do it. Whereas if you get proactive, you can have a certain degree of influence on the narrative and just make sure that you're being transparent in a sensible way and what have you. I would agree. I think the changes are going to be industry first, then insurance, then regulators. The regulators are never going to drive the bus. Okay, cool. So I think this is a good note to leave things on. We've covered so many topics, Fran. Again, you've dropped a lot of knowledge on us today, and I really, really appreciate it. Any closing thoughts? Anything, you mentioned you've written a book. You've mentioned all these various programs you're involved in. Anything you want to share with folks if they want to check it out?
Definitely, you can look up Franny the Safety Nanny. She's based loosely on Fran, but it's not, it's an imaginary nanny because that's really how we teach kids adversity. We tell them all the what ifs. So definitely look it up. It's cute. It's the Dr. Seuss, I say, of safety. I try to make everything rhyme. But even not just plugging my book, I really want us to build our profession. Safety is not just a very lucrative profession, but it is a rewarding. I say that we're instantaneously gratified. Every day we go home and nothing bad happens. We're a profession where we get the gratification to say, man, we've gone a week. If we're used to stuff happening in a week, and we've gone a week and nothing has happened. So I think that it's a very rewarding profession. I would love, for people to take an interest in our profession and talk to your nearest safety person. There are a diversity of ways to enter safety. You don't just have to have a degree to get into our field. A safety degree is nice, but people do enter our field organically. And so that's really what, is my passion. If we have 2 people who sign up for safety after hearing the podcast, I would think that this was a rock star podcast. So those are my thoughts.
I think even just those salary comps might get a few people interested. So absolutely. If anybody wants to connect with you, based on what they've heard today or anything else, wants to follow what you're up to, is LinkedIn the best place to do that?
LinkedIn is the best place to do that for now. I don't have all of my links for all of my organizations posted because, obviously one of my organizations is targeted towards underserved girls who are trying to go to college. And so you want to have some anonymity to that. But you definitely can look up Franny the Safety Nanny. You can definitely look up my LinkedIn page. You can Google the things that I'm up to. Fortunately for me, a lot of the stuff that I'm involved in is out on the World Wide Web. So yeah.
I think that is a certain silver lining. I wish certain things I was involved in weren't on the World Wide Web. Okay, awesome. Well, I guess with that, again, thank you so much for answering my questions here, Fran. I know I learned a lot and I really enjoyed the conversation. And again, I appreciate your patience with the various technical difficulties we've encountered, but I think folks are going to get a lot from this. So thank you again for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Fran and Joe. I've enjoyed it as well.
All right. Well, thank you for making it all the way through the episode. I just wanted to mention again, this podcast is brought to you by Opslock. Opslock is the new way to keep your team safe at work. We're basically the most modern and advanced health and safety tool out there. If that sounds interesting to you, one of the things that we're offering to listeners of this podcast is free access to our workplace observations tool, meaning that you can roll out a digital workplace observations tool in your company, no matter what the size is, for free. If that sounds interesting or you just want to learn a little bit more, go to our website, opslock.com, fill out the Get a Demo form, let us know that you heard about us on the podcast, and someone, probably me, will set up a call with you. So anyway, that's it. Thanks a lot for listening through the episode, and I hope you have a great day.